It's Bruce here from Aussie Fairings. Today I wanted to have a chat about some of the differences between the types of fairings that we sell, so that you guys can have a better understanding of how they are, how they perform, what they're going to be like on your bike and things like that. And it will help dispel some of the myths that are out there around these kinds of things too. I've been selling fairings now for over 10 years. Started doing it a number of years ago when I was living in Sydney. We had a workshop down there and we were fitting fairing kits for people, and also doing smash repairs and workshop repairs, so I have a pretty good understanding of how to fit fairings and what's involved. So hopefully I can pass some of that information to you guys and it'll be useful to you when you are in need of a fairing kit for your bike. So I guess one of the first things we want to talk about is the different types of fairing kits. So predominantly there's two different types of fairing kits in the market. There's what we call injection molded fairing kits, which are very accurate. They're produced in the same way that your OEM fairing would have been produced. They're produced out of an injection molded machine, which is made with a die, and it's basically all the holes, all the tabs, all the mounting points all come out of that machine on the panel as it comes out of that machine, and it's very, very accurate. It's pretty much how most things are tooled these days, but it's not the only way that fairing kits can be made. So ultimately the two different types of fairing kits we have are injection molded fairing kits and press molded fairing kits. Now we try and stay away from press molded fairing kits where we can. We certainly don't sell any that we know are going to be troublesome, and that's why we don't have all the listings on our site, and also because molds get damaged over time, and as they get damaged we tend to lose the ability to sell those kits. So predominantly what we try and sell is injection molded fairing kits, and wherever we can that's what we're going to sell for your bike. But there are some older bikes, RGV 250s, TZRs, CBR 400s, NC35s, and a host of other typically small engine bikes that where there's still quite popular bikes out there, and we try and service those bikes. But the only way that we can provide a fairing kit for those bikes these days is with a press molded fairing kit. Now these are kits that we've sold before. We know they fit, even though they're not perfect. They will fit the bike. But we're not going to talk about that straight away. The first thing that I want to talk about predominantly is injection molded fairing kits and what you can expect from an injection molded fairing kit. Now, one of the things that can happen with injection molded fairing kits, and especially in an aftermarket factory, is that in an OEM factory they're going to have very, very good strict tolerances. So factories are going to be temperature controlled, and the way the machines work and the environment that they're working in is very exact. In an aftermarket factory, of course, we're not going to have that same sort of exactness. So what can happen is panels can be taken out of an injection molded machine while they're still hot, and depending on the atmospheric conditions, and this can actually happen in an OEM factory as well, but it's not as predominant to happen, as you can get a little bit of warping of panels. So sometimes you can get a panel and the panel's not 100% perfect. It'll be close to perfect, but it won't be quite perfect. And so the way perhaps where there's tight edges where they mold together, those edges will be just that little bit different, or that little bit out, and you've just got a little bit more effort into fitting those panels. One of the things you can do to correct some of those problems is you can actually use a heat gun, and you can actually heat panels and hold them just while they cool, and that will help actually move things back into the position where you want them, so they have that memory when you fit it to your kit. Of course, if you're going to use a heat gun, don't overheat things, don't melt paint. You don't need to take it to that degree. You just need to basically heat the panel so it's hot to touch, and move it and change it. So one of the really important things, I guess, with fairing kits is paint colours and decals. So people are forever asking, do kits come with decals? Do kits come painted? Do they come with the holes pre-drilled? So the answer to those questions is yes, they do. They come with decals. They come with whatever you see on our website in the way of a fairing kit. If it has decals on it, if it's painted, then that's exactly what you're going to get. There can be variances between batches though. So we could show, say for example, like the Red Bull kit that I've got in the background here. We could show the kit like this, and we could show the overall product picture of that product. But it doesn't mean that when we paint it, because we've painted it, say 6 months or 3 months down the track, that the yellow and the blue and everything are going to be exactly the same every single time. They're going to be variations between batches. So one of the things that will often happen with a client is they buy a fairing kit, they fit it to their bike, and now unfortunately have an accident. Perhaps they have a low side, or someone knocks their bike over, or something happens, and now they've got a damaged side panel. and this is a very common question that I would get, would be, what can I do if I've got a damaged side panel on my bike? So let's assume this is a side panel on your bike and you have a low side and this panel gets damaged. This panel is a really great example because it's got a lot of different colours on it, and it's got a lot of things that would have to match up with other things on the bike. So if you have a lower panel on here, say for example, the black and the white has to match up in the correct place. If this mounts up to an upper panel, which it does, the green and the white and so on all has to match up and go together. I think this goes on the front here. Yeah, so we can see there where the two have to marry together. And you know, this one's not too bad actually, because the good thing about this one is that there's only really green there, so there's no real drastic problems. But let's assume, say for example, we had a decal that came up here, or some of these decals on the side come up into the side, which often they do. Then what could happen is we could make the panel. It's not a problem, we could definitely make the panel. But the problem, there's a couple of problems with making single panels. One is that the decals, it's very, very hard to get a colour and a decal match afterwards. So if you make a kit, say 2 months down the track, when you've made this kit, this is all spray painted, made, masked up all together, and everything matches. 2 or 3 months down the track, what can happen is that we're not going to be able to obviously match that panel up with the rest of your fairing kit anymore, because we don't have the rest of your fairing kit. You've got that. So we can make the panel, but the accuracy of getting the decals in exactly the right places and getting all the colours accurate is going to be extremely, extremely difficult. Probably impossible even. So that's the first problem that we would have. The second problem that we would have is the cost. So we could ship a whole box pretty much halfway around the world at a pretty competitive price, you know. But if we try and ship a single panel, the shipping cost just becomes exorbitantly expensive. So you would think that if you had a box that, say, like I think these boxes are about a metre by 800 by 800 or something to that size. That's a typical kind of box size. If we chop that box in half, you would think, let's say we pay $140 to ship a box. Now you would assume that we've cut the box in half, it must be half price to ship that box. But no, in actual fact, when you chop that box in half, or if you chop it into a quarter size and try and ship it, it now costs you 2/3 of the price of the whole box to still ship it. So what ends up happening is this panel now might cost, let's say the panel, say for example, we could sell this, say, for $95 or $100. But the shipping now costs $100. So the shipping starts to cost the same or more than the cost of the panel, and it starts to really jump the cost of the panel up. So by the time we get around to actually selling the panel, it's too expensive. So that's one of the reasons why we don't sell, well, there are a couple of the reasons why we don't sell fairing panels and why we typically only do fairing kits and not panels. We can sell an unpainted panel, but then you've still got the cost of, you know, painting that thing locally, and it can be quite expensive. So quite complicated paint kits can be done, quite complicated decals can be done. If you were asking for pinpoint accuracy of where we're going to place things, no, that can't be done. If you were asking for fluorescent colours or specialist colours, we couldn't do that. For example, Ducati, when they make their Ducati reds, it's almost like an orange base to it. So what they'll do when they layer that paint up is they will layer it up with 5 or 6 different layers of base coats, each one a thin coat, and each one a slight variation on the colour. And when they put the final top coat on, what actually happens is you can kind of almost see a depth in that paint where you can kind of see right through into the background of it. And depending on how you look at it, it'll look like it's almost like it's orange, and sometimes it'll look like it's more like a deep red. We can't do those kind of paint jobs. We can't do those kind of paint jobs because we just simply don't have the expertise to do that. It's not our forte to do that kind of stuff. It's expensive to get it done, and it's just not something we offer or something we do. We could sell a blank unpainted fairing kit to you, and you could go to a local paint shop and you could get that done. But those kind of paint jobs typically, or those kind of paint and decal jobs, they just cost a lot of money. They cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and that's why, you know, Ducatis and other sports bikes get written off, because the panels and the paintwork from the OEM factories just cost so much money. They cost, you know, more money than what the bike's worth, especially when they're bought as single panels. So there's some of the things. Fluorescent colours, that's another thing that we can't do. So fluorescent colours is another oddball. We don't like doing fluorescent colours because they tend to fade in the sun quite quickly, and they just don't hold up over a long period of time. Carbon wraps, we had the same sort of problems. The first batches of carbon wraps that we tried years ago just had too many problems with the longevity of them. They just didn't last. they'll last for a short period of time, and then the wraps will start to come undone and will start to have problems. I think the newer wrap technology now has got better, but it's not something we want to experiment with because it's just not worth it for us to do it. At the moment, the best thing for us to do is just keep doing the panels that we do. So most colour schemes we can do, but the odd specialist colour scheme we can't do. So trim panels and inner panels. I'm going to show you some of those now. These are what I would call trim panels. Most fairing kits that we sell come with trim panels. So trim panels will be the panels, these kind of rubbishy plastic panels that come on the inside of your fairing kit. I mean, to be fair, OEM trim panels are not the best neither. They're pretty average, you know. They're just kind of really in there just to fill some space and make the kit look good, you know. And they're not in an area that's predominantly seen and right in your face. So they don't matter so much. And with OEM ones, they're not that great. With aftermarket ones, they're even just that step down again. So I often find that with these trim panels, that what happens is these little kind of holes and areas and stuff where things are supposed to mount up, I often have to trim this stuff out or drill it out a little bit just to make these things fit nicely. Often these holes have to be drilled out. The way these clip together on these edges is never quite perfect. So what I would suggest is that if you've got your original trim panels, your Honda or Suzuki or Ducati or whatever it is, you reuse your trim panels, you reuse your hardware wherever you can. But these, you know, these will do the job at a pinch. So I bought, say for example, a G6R 750 a few years back, and that came with no fairings. It basically had nothing. It had no headlights, no fairings, no nothing. And I had to use all the trim panels. And you can make these fit, but it's just ideal to have the original ones. But if you have to use them, we've got them. They're there. They typically come with the bike. Not all of them come with the bike, I should say, actually, because sometimes rear huggers and rear guards and stuff don't come in the kit. It's quite common for those to not come in the kit. So if you're unsure, and it's hard for me to list all the stuff because we have like over 3,000 items on our site, the best thing to do is just email and ask, or give us a call and ask, and we can soon find out whether those things come or not, because we generally have pictures of most of the stuff. So with our kits, we'll supply a screen and we supply a heat shield, obviously a bigger piece than this, but we do supply it. This heat shield, to be fair, it's you know, it's a freebie that comes in the kit, a lot like the screens. If you've got an exhaust that comes extremely close to your fairing, like I do on my CBR 1000, and I'll show you some pictures of that, wrap your exhaust or buy yourself some really good quality 1000-degree heat shield, because fairings can melt, and in fact Honda in particular had some problems a few years back, even with the OEM fairing panels. You know, I mean, they are plastic at the end of the day, and even though they're a high temp grade of plastic, they still can melt. And if you've got an exhaust, you know, that's getting up to, you know, a few hundred degrees, and it's sitting right beside, within 5 mils of your fairing kit or close to touching your fairing kit, you need heat shield or an exhaust wrap, or both. I know ideally both. I've got both for my bike. I did use this stuff in the end, and I used a wrap as well around my exhaust. And the wraps, I think you can buy. Like, I bought my wrap for about $25. It was about $17 for the clip things to kind of hold it all on. Not overly expensive. Heat shield, on the other hand, was about $70. So you know, I wasn't so keen on that, as you might not be. So so that's a tip in regards to heat shield. But definitely do it. You definitely need to do it. It is important. So how do aftermarket fairing kits differ from OEM fairing kits, which would have come with your bike straight out of the factory? So one of the major differences, I guess, with aftermarket fairing kits as opposed to factory moulded fairing kits is that the paint and decals are always going to be, they're never going to be exactly the same. So, I mean, if we were painting, say, for example, a black Honda fairing kit with silver decals or chrome decals, it's going to look pretty much the same. There's not going to be a huge difference between that and a factory fairing kit. Where the differences come in is when you've got multiple colours. So predominantly the difference between fairing kits would be the paintwork. So in a Kawasaki factory, if they were going to paint, say for example, one of their Kawasaki greens, they will have a colour chart, they'll mix big batches of paint, and a robot's going to pretty much paint the majority of the panels, or a very, very professional painter, you know, that's painting, and that's all they do. They sit there and they just paint fairing kits all day. So if they're painting Kawasaki Lime, for example, Kawasaki Lime, you can be sure that within batches that it's going to be it's going to be pretty accurate. There's not going to be major variances or differences. There might be minor differences, but they're not going to be major. With an aftermarket fairing kit, because we're not painting to Kawasaki paint codes, we're painting to our own paint codes. So there can be bigger differences between batches, and we can't guarantee that, say for example, Kawasaki line that you want is going to be the Kawasaki line that we're able to provide, because we're not painting to those colour codes. One of the other differences might be decals, for example. So decals, when we're making decals, our decals are all going to be placed by hand. They're not only are they placed by hand, but they're made aftermarket, so they're never exactly the same as a Kawasaki decal. So there can be minor differences in those kinds of things as well. So this is another area where you can find differences in the panels. One of the other differences will be that if you have a factory that's lining decals up, they will have a system for lining the decals up exactly the same on every panel every single time. There will be no variations, or the variation will be very, very minor. Whereas in an aftermarket factory, because we're making so many kits with so many different models, we're not just making Kawasaki, we're making Honda and Yamaha and Ducati and so on. We don't have those type of systems in place. So what the decal guys are doing is they're going to place the decals where they think the decals look best, not necessarily in exactly millimetre by millimetre precision that would happen in a Kawasaki factory. So they're some of the main differences. One of the other differences that you would find between a factory fairing and an aftermarket fairing would be the insides of the fairings. So on an aftermarket kit, where we're making kits and we're selling kits and delivering kits halfway across the world for, really less than $1,000, and well less than $1,000 in a lot of cases, the inside of the fairings are going to be something that are not, well, they're neglected. They're not going to spend a lot of time painting the insides of the fairings, because we're building and making fairing kits to a budget. So we can actually paint the insides of the fairings, but we always charge more money to do that. Typically we wouldn't do it. And the other reason would be that the finish on the inside of aftermarket panels is never quite as perfect. So if you're to paint the inside of the panels, it's never going to look quite as good. So that's another reason why we don't paint the insides of the panels. So what I'll do now is I'll quickly show you, a press molded fairing kit, and I'll show you the difference between a press molded fairing kit and an injection molded fairing kit, so you can actually see what those differences are. So this panel here, I think this was off a CBR 900RR, an old style one. This is only available as a press molded kit. And looking at it initially, it actually all looks quite okay. Where the differences are with these types of kits are in the way these kind of panels are molded. So where you have this kind of stuff, you have a lot of angular stuff with quite tight tolerances. This stuff's never going to be as good as an injection molded kit. It just can't be. It's not possible to do that. The other places that are different are on the insides of the panels and the tabs. So for example, these tabs here on the inside here, I don't know if you can see those, but a little bit closer. See these tabs? Those tabs are actually being glued in there. And these pillars also are glued in. So that tab and these tabs here, because they're all glued in place and these holes are all manually drilled, what can happen is in the factory they'll have a jig that holds this stuff, relatively where it's supposed to go, but it's never going to be as perfect as an injection molded kit, because it's not molded in there as it came out of the mold. This has all been added on afterwards. So what can happen over time, it doesn't always happen, but sometimes the glue can fail on these things. Sometimes you can find that the position of the mounting point is not quite accurate, or the position of the holes drilled is not quite perfect. And quite often what you have to do with these kits is you have to drill the holes out a little bit larger, or you've got to mess around and find different fittings or different ways of fitting things in order to make it all come together nicely. But that is the price to be paid for having a press molded fairing kit. Okay, so this is the head fairing off the same bike. I think this was off an RVF 400. That's what it was. That's what this fairing kit was off. Not a CBR 900. I know I have a CBR 900 kit here somewhere as well, but that's what this is off. Now this has got the same sorts of things on the inside of here. So we've got the mounting points for the headlights and probably the fairing stay bracket mounted in here, and then there's indicator holes and so on the side here. And those indicator holes and stuff, probably these tabs won't be that accurate. They'll just be pretty average. These mounting points here, you might find these mounting points are out by 3 or 4 mils sometimes. And often it's just simply because they can't set up right 100% perfectly all the time, and it's very, very difficult to fit this kind of stuff and make this stuff perfect. So sometimes you have to drill a fairing stale, or you've got to drill holes out a little bit larger. Sometimes you might have to cut the pillars off, and you might actually have to move the pillars. Pretty much with the kits I'm selling at the moment in the way of press molded stuff, we're not having those issues at the moment, but they are. I explain those things because they are worst case scenarios that can happen with these types of kits. It doesn't usually happen with these kits, but it can. And it will certainly happen if you were selling, say for example, a ZX7R fairing kit or something like that. And that's why I don't sell them, because I just know they're paying, and they're paying for people to fit, so I just don't bother to sell them. It's easier to not sell them. But yeah, these pillars, and the other thing is that the pitch depth inside here, where this actually screws in here, this can be the wrong pitch for the screws that you perhaps have that held your headlight on. So sometimes what you have to do is find new bolts as well. So the original bolts might not work on this type of kit. What I'll do now is I'll show you a proper injection factory molded kit, because I've got one of those here as well. So this is a Honda panel. This is off my CBR 1000 behind me here. This is the original OEM panels. Or one of the original OEM panels, I should say. And the difference in these are the type of decals that are used on these kits. I mean, Honda, when they put decals on stuff, they're just really, really slick. So, as you can see here, the quality of these decals really is quite good. They're a 3D raised style decal. They're just a really, really nice decal. The way everything's on there is just so perfect. And yeah, but these cost a lot of money, So if you have to buy one of these panels, I think the retail price on one side panel was about $600 odd. Obviously, it's going to depend on where you go and who you buy them, but that was the Honda's recommended retail price inside of Australia. So you can imagine what a full kit costs. It costs big dollars. Whereas we're selling a whole Honda kit, I think, for about just over $700. Now the other difference on the inside of these panels, obviously because they're injection molded, is that everything's mounted as opposed to the press mold. Everything that's in here, they're all molded into the kit, or into the panel. Sorry, molded into the panel, and the panel's made. So everything's perfect. The other thing with Honda, and that factories will quite often do, is they will put a lot of extras on the insides of panels. So this one actually had sound deadening, a little bit of, it's kind of like a sound deadening heat shield kind of stuff. It's not so much for heat, but really more for a sound deadening and muffling. In an aftermarket fairing kit, you're not going to get these types of things. So I'll show you side panel. So we have a side panel here, we have another bike, and this is a pretty basic panel, but there's a little bit of heat shield that's been stuck on the inside of here, and this is typically what we would recommend to our customers to do. So we actually send a big pad of heat shield, and you can cut it up and you can use it inside your panels. These panels that I'm showing you, actually, these are factory seconds. These are not the best quality panels. These are ones that we have problems with them, and I've got them here in the garage. These are actually going to be sold cheaper a little bit later, but for now they're good to kind of show people the differences between the different types of panels. So yeah, you can see with these panels it's the same. Everything's molded in place. Mounting points all comes straight out of the machine, just exactly like the OEM stuff. So what does it come down to? It comes down to budget, really. That's the thing. You see, in OEM factory, like Honda or Suzuki or Kawasaki or Yamaha or any of those big guys, big factories, they just have such a huge budget. So and they're going to make thousands and thousands and thousands of bikes every year. So are their fairing kits going to be perfect? Yeah, of course they're going to be pretty perfect, but they're going to come at a cost. Is aftermarket stuff going to be at the same level? No, it's not. That's just a simple fact of it. Is it close? Yeah, it's close. And for most of my customers, they find it's close enough. I get a ton of good comments every week, and of course we get the odd person who's negative, and hence why I make videos and try to make videos and show people. Because what I don't want is I don't want customers who are unrealistic to buy fairing kits from me, or even from anywhere else, because it's just a waste of everybody's time. It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of my time. It's just a costly exercise, especially when we have to make, because we develop and produce and make everything on order out of our factory in China. So, when you order a fairing kit, we put the process through. We get it started for you. We do all the translation of the requirements, and then what we're doing is we're actually getting the factory to take pictures of the process. So at the end of the process, when the kit's produced and painted and decaled, sometimes before the clear coat and always after the clear coat, we're getting pictures made. We're checking those pictures, going back and forth, correcting anything that needs to be corrected. And there's a fairly involved process behind actually selling a set of fairing kits. It's not just a matter of, oh, we're just going to import some fairing kits and we're just going to sell them and just slam them out there. It's not really just not how it works. Like there's quite a lot of work behind selling a fairing kit. There's a lot of liaising with clients, back and forth, trying to gather requirements, trying to get those requirements into a really good static format, getting those through to supply, getting the supplier to actually supply the stuff properly. And it is a time-consuming process. It's a very time-consuming process. And I've worked with, probably, 5 to 10 different factories over the space of 10 years, and I've pretty much stuck with my main factory for a lot of years now. And the reason I stick with them is because generally they do a very good job. And what I tend to do is every now and again someone will come along and they'll say, oh, we can do something better, and I'll experiment with them. And I'll buy a bike and I'll buy some kits and I'll play around with the kits, and so many times I've just found that, that overall it hasn't been worth it. They might make 1 or 2 kits and the 1 or 2 kits are good, and then suddenly you start getting kits where you've got lots and lots of problems. You've got lots of paint defects and you've got lots of quality control problems. So one thing about the factory that I'm working with at the moment is, and that I've been working with for a long time, is that the quality control, we've got that pretty much down pat. It's pretty good. Like it's as good as we're going to get it. Like we're feeding information back and forth about the quality of things. If someone complains about something, we get back to the factory and we try and resolve it. If you've got something and it's arrived and it's painted badly, or something's really gone wrong with it, drastically wrong with it, then what we would do is we would replace those panels. In some cases, we'll refund you the whole kit and take the kit back. But it's rare. We don't have a lot of that happening. The number one problem we have at the moment is actually not kit problems or paint problems or decal problems. It's actually shipping problems. So it's very, very hard to get stuff shipped halfway around the world and to pass through a number of hands and then to not drop a box or kick the boxes around. And we've got a lot of panels and they're wrapped pretty well. But what can happen over a journey halfway around the world is if the couriers are not careful with that box and they drop that box on the journey, and they drop it a number of times, or they shake it around, or they rough with it, we can end up with parts on panels poking through and rubbing on other panels. A typical example of that would be like, say, this corner, say for example, that can have wrap around it, but what can happen is someone puts something heavy on top of the box, and then the box is moved around and it's pushing through. I can feel it even on my hand. It's quite sharp, so it doesn't matter how well you wrap that. At some point, if someone's not careful with the box, that could eventually rub through, and it could rub, say for example, onto a tank. If the tank was underneath there, or a side panel, and that's a huge problem. That problem, in fact, will affect probably about maybe 2 or 3% of our products that we ship out every year, and it's extremely frustrating, really extremely frustrating, because what ends up happening is we end up replacing panels with customers because things have got scratched, and it's annoying. We do offer shipping insurance during the checkout process to help cover that, but often it's frustrating for us, it's frustrating for our clients, and that's probably the number one problem. Defects can happen in paint. I spoke recently with my CBR 1000 how there was a defect in the paint on one of the side panels, and I wasn't happy with that. I'm going to get the factory to replace that. Typically, if you had a defect in the paint, it was under the clear coat, and it's very obvious that the factory has caused that problem, we'd replace that panel. That's what we have to do. So. But those things are rare. We don't have a lot of those problems, but they can happen. The typical time where these sort of things usually go wrong is usually around Chinese New Year. Chinese New Year, we're going to have a very, very busy period of time. We're going to take a lot of orders, and the throughput through the factory is going to be quite fast at that time. And that typically, if we're going to have a problem, that will be the problem where we'll have shipping problems or we'll have paint problems. And that's where this paint problem came from. It just came because simply one of the factory workers rushed the job where he shouldn't have. He shouldn't have rushed the job, but it got rushed. And touched it and then thought, oh well, it'll be okay, no one will notice. And yeah, of course I've noticed, and so will the customer, and I would never be happy with that. I'd never find that acceptable. But yeah, that's a rare problem, but it is a possibility. They are the sort of things that can go wrong. They don't go wrong often, but they can go wrong. And when they go wrong like that, we would fix them. Minor defects in paint. Like say for example where there's multiple layers of paint in the process, or multiple layers of decal, blending out of edges and things like that. There might be, say for example on my bike again, if you watch my video on this one, there was a line through one of the side panels here where there's a layer of paint underneath plus another layer of decals, and it's been trimmed down, and you can see a slight line across there. To me it was not really a big deal, but some customers would be frustrated by that and they wouldn't want that. So if you're that kind of customer, then an aftermarket fairing kit probably is just not for you. It probably just isn't going to work for you. You probably need to go and buy OEM, or go and pay a local paint factory to do it for you. If you can't accept minor defects in paint, so you know, in a really nice Honda factory or a Suzuki factory or a Ducati factory, they have very, very clean booths. They're very, very strict process. So someone going in and out of that paint booth, they have to have, you know, they have to have been showered down in a particular suit with particular socks on, and that booth is absolutely immaculate, absolutely perfect. There's no chance of any dust or anything getting on paintwork. In an aftermarket factory, even though we still have a quality control there, it's not going to be as intense as a factory paint booth. So the end result of that is that you can end up with little defects in the paint. They're not usually major, but they do happen. And I did outline some of them on this particular paint job. You know, sometimes we get panels like this. This panel's pretty good. These are pretty good. That I really can't really find any problems with this at all. And the same with this panel. Again, it's pretty flawless. You know, it's pretty perfect. Oh, maybe there's one here. Yeah. So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. So it's probably going to be extremely hard to see this. But there is actually. Maybe you can see it's just sort of between my fingers here. There's a little bit of a flaw in the thing, and that's probably just a little piece of dust or something that's got caught under the paintwork. So that kind of thing does happen, and we're never going to be able to stop that from happening, because we're not charging thousands and thousands of dollars for panels or for fairing kits. We're charging, you know, sub $1,000. And you know, you could go and try and get something painted locally. I had stuff painted. I've had quite often what will happen is I'll buy a smash bike, or I buy a bike that's not in its prime, and I'll you know, fit fairings, fix it up, and eventually I'll ride it around for a while. Eventually I might sell it, and I'll have tanks painted. I have tanks painted fairly regularly, and what I've found even locally is that, you know, it can even vary. You know, so you go to a paint shop and you can have your tank painted. And my last tank that I got painted still had minor flaws like that. It was no different. It was no better. And in fact, it cost me about, you know, $350 to get my tank painted, which is not a huge amount of money. But yeah, it had minor flaws in it. You know, it wasn't quite perfect. You know, it was not. None of the stuff was at the point where you're going to look at it and your friends are going to look at it and go, dude, you've got something really dodgy going on there. Obviously, this handprint on the side of this wasn't so cool. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about more minor stuff than that. Where people are going to look at your bike and they're going to think it just looks fine, you know. If you start getting close with magnifying glass and you start looking at everything, maybe it's not going to stand up to that kind of test. So if you're one of those guys that needs that level of paintwork and you need a concourse ready paint job or something close to that, then you need to have your stuff painted locally. You need to go to a very, very professional paint shop and get that job done by them. Get the decals made by a really professional decal company, or order original decals and have those fitted to your kit, plus have it painted in-house, where you can go and you can look at that process all the way through. One of the things that we can't do is we can't paint, you know, typical bike shop paint codes. So if you say to us, I've looked up the paint code for my Kawasaki and it's Kawasaki K694 lime green, can you make that colour? No, we can't. Why can't we do it? Because in Australia maybe someone could do it. Let me tell you a little bit about it. So even inside of Australia, Kawasaki and Honda and so on, they hold on to their paint codes. They don't kind of give those paint codes out very easily. So what will happen is people will kind of figure out over time what they think went into making that particular colour or that primary colour. And you'll have places like Colorific and other places that are online where they show and sell those paint codes, or they'll mix paint and supply you paint mixed to those paint codes. So those paint codes will be fairly accurate, and what they've done is they've spent a lot of time going back and forth, mixing paint, spraying it, mixing it, spraying it, painting it, and checking it the whole. And that's an extremely time-consuming process. And that process, because it's time-consuming, costs a lot of money. But that's how you can get really accurate colours. So If you want a panel and your panel really accurate, you have to go to a factory where they can do that, or you go to a paint shop where they can do that, where they will take the time to do that, but they're going to charge you accordingly. We can't do that. And the other reason we can't do it is because we're talking about European paint colour codes and Chinese paint colour codes. So you can't expect someone in a Chinese factory who's working for a real minimal amount of money, and they're pretty professional at what they do, but you can't expect them to understand English well enough to be able to take an English paint code and translate it to Chinese. It's never going to happen. I've dealt with this for years, and I just say to customers, look, the best you can hope for is you take some pictures of a colour with a sheet of white up against it in natural light, you send us those pictures, and we will work to those pictures as closely as we can. The other issue we're going to have is that on a computer, the colours are not going to look the same as what they would look in real life. So no, we cannot paint really accurate, really close paint code type colours. We simply cannot do it because of the process that we go through and because of the way we have to do things. It's just not possible to do it. It's not possible for us to do it anyway. It's possible for a local painter to do that kind of work, and if you need that level, go to a local painter, spend the money, get it done so that you'll be happy. If you're happy to live with a little bit of difference, then an aftermarket kit's for you. If you are looking to protect your bike in the event of a drop, an aftermarket kit is a good answer for you. So for me, it's with my bike, I just know that I ride my bike all the time. It's not like I'm going out and I'm planning to smash it or drop it every day, but you know, on occasion you can have accidents and you can drop your bike. I dropped my bike once in a car park doing motor gymkhana, and we're doing, we're doing stupid things, but you know, the end result was the bike got dropped and I had crash protection on it, but we still ended up with a little bit of damage. Now, if I have aftermarket fairing kits on it, and the whole fairing kit cost me, say, $700 or $750, I can just sling the fairings off it and I can put another set of fairings on it. It's cheap enough. It's not even worth barely going to the insurance company to even ask for an insurance claim. Because I know what's going to happen if I go to the insurance company. The insurance company's going to go, oh mate, that's too expensive to fix, we're not fixing that. That's going to be a write-off. And so many bikes are written off all the time in that way. So aftermarket fairing kits are great for that kind of stuff. They're great for that type of situation. They're great for racing situations where you're going out and you're doing track days. Again, because if you drop your bike, it's not as expensive to fix. Especially if you're not covered by insurance, but generally in Australia you're not if you're taking out and going out and doing track day. Anyway, that's about all I can think of, for the moment. I think I've covered most of the bases. If you have any more questions, you can sling them in an email to me, or you can put them in the comments around the video. Happy to answer questions around this stuff. Maybe we'll revisit some of the stuff and have a chat about it again. But I think that's pretty much the basics of everything that should get you enough information for you to make an informed decision around your next purchase when you need an aftermarket fairing kit for your bike. Anyway, safe riding, stay shiny side up, keep safe, talk to you guys soon.